Hopefully I'll capture your attention with this great topic. So I'm here to talk about behavioral economics and its real world applications. My name is Sion Bonone. I'm a professor in the economics department here at Swarthmore. Before I dive in, I wanted to give you a little bit about me very briefly. So I grew up in many states here in the US, so Florida, California, Massachusetts, and primarily actually New Jersey. My parents are Indian immigrants, came here in the 70s. A little bit about my academic background, not so much to show off, but rather to maybe set the scene for talking a little bit about Swarthmore and how it compares to other schools you might consider. So I did my BA in public policy at Princeton, and then I worked for a year in Kenya for the International Rescue Committee at a refugee camp in the northern part of the country. So I'm happy to talk more about development and that kind of thing. As you'll see, some of my research is in that domain. Then I did a master's in public policy at the Kennedy School at Harvard, which is their public policy school, and I stayed there to do a PhD in public policy as well. As a teaser, maybe to the Q&A parts, so I did all my schoolwork at Princeton and Harvard, but I think it's a no-brainer to choose a place like Swarthmore for undergrad over either of those, though I really enjoyed my time at both. It's not particularly close to the level of academic training you get at the undergrad level, but I'm happy to talk more about that in the Q&A. I love both those schools, but I think I love them more for graduate school, and I certainly have come to appreciate Swarthmore and what it offers. But I'm sure you guys are considering schools like that, and we can talk about all that in the Q&A a little bit more, because there's a lot of misperceptions out there, and yeah, I'm happy to try to correct those to the extent possible, and I encourage you to consider schools like Swarthmore, perhaps even ahead of schools you might not think about putting Swarthmore ahead of. And I joined the faculty here in 2015 after I finished my PhD. So, okay, so here's the quick outline. I'm going to give you a super quick introduction to behavioral economics with some examples, and I'm going to talk about one of my research projects applying behavioral science or behavioral economics in a real world setting in Kenya. So the big question kind of at the core of behavioral economics is, who are we as people? And the field kind of started when some economics researchers kind of took a step back from their research and the research of other economists and said, you know, a lot of our papers describe human behavior and they make assumptions about how people behave. And when you take all those assumptions together, we end up with this picture of human behavior that doesn't really comport with who we see day to day. Right? And in particular, those economists noted that a lot of economics papers describe human behavior and human decision-making as actually more consistent with the decision-making of this particular TV character. So this is Dr. Spock, or Mr. Spock. He doesn't have a PhD. Mr. Spock from Star Trek. And he says things like this all the time. So may I not say that I've not thoroughly enjoyed serving with humans. I find their illogic and foolish emotions a constant irritant. So he's this kind of, I don't know if you know the show, but he's this kind of robotic person, but he's not actually a person. He's a Vulcan. He's a non-human being, and he's super mechanical, and he thinks about everything in terms of probabilities, and he's not emotional in any way. He's like a rational optimizer of his well-being, right? And those economists were kind of looking at economics papers and say, these papers seem to be describing how Mr. Spock would make decisions. But when I look around at my friends and family, I see a lot more Homer Simpson or cartoon characters in my friends and family, kind of laughable deviations from rational, optimal decision-making and lots of mistakes, systematic errors in behavior. And I think we need economic models that take into consideration, not that we're necessarily unintelligent or incapable of rational thought, but rather that we sometimes behave in ways that are not consistent with the super rational, hyper rational, selfish, self-interested kind of model of decision-making. And a lot more times we're fighting ourselves, right? So Homer here is telling his brain to just be cool and take this test so he can go back to drinking, right? So it's almost this constant internal battle between what we rationally know is right but what we kind of feel like we want to do. So behavioral economics is all about kind of bringing the psychology into economic models of decision-making. And the key idea there is that people are systematically irrational. So if that's the main takeaway you take away from this talk, I think I want you to take that away. The key idea is not that people are dumb or incapable of making good decisions, but rather that they systematically deviate from rational decision-making in a way that can be modeled, and we can kind of build public policies, for example, that help people make the right choice. So there's several aspects of behavioral economics, and I'm going to do these super quick. just to give you a little taste of what behavioral economists study. So one thing they study is imperfect optimization. So failure to make the optimal choice. And you can see this in, for example, the number of people who approach retirement age and wish that they'd saved more prior to retirement. There's very few people who hit retirement age and think, man, I didn't spend enough in all the years before now, and now I have too much money. That's just not very common. Most people tend to overspend when they're younger and under save, right? Buyer's remorse is another thing we see all the time. You buy something and then 2 days later, you wish you hadn't bought it and you wonder, why do I keep making this mistake and buying things I don't need and don't want? So another example of imperfect optimization there. There's also an idea called bounded self-control, which is that we have limits on how much we can control our own behavior and keep ourselves from doing the wrong thing. So this is an example that probably will resonate with you in high school, and it definitely will resonate with you once you get to college and beyond, which is the procrastination cycle, right? You'll always put off doing your homework or doing something important till tomorrow, and then you just do it right before the deadline, right? Why do we keep putting ourselves in that position, in that high stress circumstance over and over, and pull these all-nighters the day before exams, which you'll learn about in college? Well, it's because we have trouble controlling our, our own decision making and doing things optimally early without stress. Overeating tends to be a big issue, especially and primarily in countries where people have access to cheap calories, right? So in a lot of countries, malnutrition is a serious issue. So I don't want to say that that's not also out there, but usually that's because people simply lack the resources to acquire calories. But when people have access to calories, they don't tend to consume the optimal number. They tend to go overboard. And so that's another way that we struggle to control our own decision making. And then, of course, everybody's going to the gym, but they're not going today. They're always going tomorrow. They're always planning to go tomorrow. So if I asked for a show of hands of how many people exercise today versus how many plan to exercise tomorrow, I'm pretty sure the latter number is going to be bigger. And that's also going to be true tomorrow and the day after and every day. So people are tending to under-exercise relative to what they themselves recognize they want. And a final broad category is non-standard preferences. So people, sort of behaviors that are not consistent with the standard model of rational decision-making. So one example is what's called status quo bias. People pick a thing that they do, and then they sort of persist in doing that thing, and they don't update and change when there's new opportunity that's even better than the status quo. You'll see that with meal plans in college. You'll sign up for a meal plan, you'll show up at college, and you'll probably stay with that meal plan the whole time you're there, even though there may be a better meal plan out there for you. You sort of sign up for one and you forget to change it, basically. And another example is just being kind to other people, right? So selfishness is sort of baked into a lot of economic models, but we see people doing pro-social things, selfless things all the time in the real world. So why is that? How can we kind of connect that back to economic models and use it to sort of fix economic models to make them kind of take into consideration that this is a real human behavior on the aggregate level? Okay, so I'm going to show you a few visual real world examples. I might skip over one or two just in the interest of time. I'd want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. But I'll talk you through a couple of my favorite economics papers that can be easily summarized with one picture, right? So this is a prominent paper by Lacetero and some colleagues where they were looking at the used car market, right? So they looked at data on the used car market, and they had a very simple question, which was, what's the relationship between the mileage on used cars and their selling price? So to do that, they've made this graph. There's nothing on it yet. I'm just going to explain the axes first. So what you see on the x-axis is the mileage on the car rounded to the nearest 500. So there'll be like one data point for every 500 miles, kind of buckets you can think of as cars falling into these different buckets. And we'll have data on every of 22 million auctioned cars in their data set. So 22 million used cars auctioned off in the United States. So huge data set. And what they wanted to plot was for each 500 mile bucket that cars could fall in, what was the average sales price? So this is not a trick question by any means. What should the nature of the relationship be? Well, we would really hope it's downward sloping, right? Because the more miles a car has on it, the lower should be the average sales price. And that is the case. So people aren't that nuts. People certainly pay less for a car with more mileage on it, but there's something else we see in the data that's hard to fully rationalize in a rational model. So I'll plot it here. What you see here is one data point for every 500 mile bin, but you see a funny little pattern. Something happens at every 10,000 mile mark. right? Which is this black line. I just drew these black lines up and down for every 10,000 mile mark. And you see this big drop off in the average sales price every time a car hits the next 10,000 mile threshold. So what's happening here? The logic here is what's called left digit bias, which is that people tend to just look at the leftmost digit of any relevant number and stop looking at anything beyond that, right? So if a car has 19,999 miles on it, people think, oh, this car doesn't have a lot of miles on it. As soon as it ticks up to 20,000, people say, uh-oh, this car has like 20,000 or more miles on it, right? So they basically don't look beyond the first number. 19,999 is a lot more appealing a car than 20,001, even though it's gone only 2 more miles. I know I get really excited when my car ticks over to the next 10,000, but it actually turns out I'm losing $500 to $1,000 in car value every time. And this is also, you can also see this reflected in the fact that things in the store or on Amazon cost $19.99. Basically you laugh at that and think, how dumb do they think I am? That's basically $20. Well, unfortunately, this proves, or this suggests very strongly that you're exactly that dumb in a sense, right? Like you are attracted to the number 1999 much more than you would if the price was listed as $20. I'll talk through one more example, then I'll skip over a couple so we can get into my recent projects. So this is a great paper looking at gym membership. And it's a very simple project that they did. They worked with a large gym in the United States, and they gathered data from that gym. And they were interested in a pretty simple question. So this gym had 2 membership options. One membership option cost $70 a month. And with that membership option, you could go to the gym as many times as you wanted. It was free to go each time. So $70 a month, unlimited access, right? They had another membership option, which was you just pay every time you go. You don't pay a monthly membership fee. And that monthly pay and that per visit payment was $10, right? So here we have 2 options, $70, you can go as much as you want, or pay $10 every time you go. So hopefully you guys can do the math on figuring out when the monthly membership is a good deal. And I hope you'll all agree that if you go at least 7 times a month, you're better off with the monthly membership, right? If you go less than 7 times a month, you're on average paying more than $10 per visit, which doesn't make sense to do because you could just pay the per visit price and pay $10 per visit. You could save money if you go less than 7 times a month, right? So what I'm going to plot here is data on people who have that monthly membership, the $70 membership. Some of them were more than $70, but for our purposes, let's just think about it as $70. And then what I plotted here is just the price per average attendance, that $10 that you could pay just to go each time. And I'm going to plot what people on the monthly contract actually seem to be paying per visit, right? In other words, if I take the $70 and I divide it by the average number of times people go in their first month, I'll get the number that I'm going to plot here, right? And in a rational world, it should be the case that people who sign up for these monthly memberships are doing it because it's a better deal. They're able to pay less than the $10, right? So we should see all of these points appearing below the line, the blue line. So unfortunately, as we get things kicked off here, it's not looking great, right? People are on average under the monthly plan paying closer to $15 per visit. In other words, they're going like 4 or 5 times in the first few months that they're members, throwing money away, right? But you could argue, well, the line is kind of pointing down. So maybe it takes them a few months to, they go 4 times the first month, then 5, then 6, like they're improving, they're getting better. They're getting closer to that 7. Maybe they just need to build that habit, right? Unfortunately, it's a rosy view of people's behavior. If anything, they get bored of it after 3 months and they stop going. And they stop going so much that they end up paying basically double what they would pay if they just paid on a non-monthly unlimited membership plan. And it kind of continues forever. And you also see in the data that people forget to cancel their subscriptions, and then they end up stuck with these subscriptions and they stop going, basically. So gyms make money off of people signing up aspirationally to go in the future, and then they never end up going, right? So that's why all the gyms have really nice equipment, because just nobody's in there using it. And the paper is actually called Paying Not to Go to the Gym. So another great example of sort of behavioral economics in the wild, people failing to optimize perfectly. I'm going to skip over these next couple just in the interest of time. So I want to talk about one more example. So how do we keep bathrooms clean. So I've censored the bottom part of this for the out of respect for all of you. So this is the men's urinal, and it tends to be that the floor near the men's urinal is not the most wonderful place in the world. It's like pretty gross in many cases. And so there's this clever idea that some marketer or psychologist or behavioral economist thought up, which is to put a little sticker inside the men's urinal. For lack of a better expression, it's to encourage men to aim, right? So what is this? This is an example of nudging good behavior. So what do I mean by nudging? Well, there's this terrific book written by Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel in economics a couple of years ago, and Cass Sunstein, a Harvard Law School professor, where they describe the idea of a nudge, which is manipulating the choice environment around the choices that someone is making to encourage a specific decision, but not remove the freedom to choose. So note that if you walk up to this urinal and you're about to use it, you are welcome to fail to aim and make a mess, right? But this kind of gives you a little push in the direction of aiming at something, like as if it's a game or something like that, and thereby keeping the bathroom a little bit cleaner for everybody else, right? So I'm not taking away your freedom to behave as you'd like to, but I'm encouraging you to move in a certain direction rather than another. So a non-gross example of this is this, I don't know if anybody here is from Chicago, but this is Lakeshore Drive, which is this nice road right on the water in Chicago. It has a beautiful view on the right-hand side, but unfortunately it also has some sharp turns, which are very dangerous and tend to lead to a lot of accidents. So some policymaker, a very clever nudger here, drew these painted lines. This is a curve here coming up on the turning left sharply, where the speed limit drops from, I think, 45 down to 25, and a lot of accidents happen there. So what this nudger did was they put these lines of paint, not just near the curve, but they got further and further apart as you get further and further away from the curve. And I've actually driven this. It's really, really kind of a cool optical illusion. If you're driving down at a steady pace from left to right on the screen, as soon as you hit these lines, they start appearing faster and faster because they're getting closer and closer together. So even if you're going at a steady speed, it feels like you're accelerating because the lines start appearing faster and faster at a fixed speed. So you're sort of tricked into hitting the brakes, basically. But that's exactly what they want you to do. They want you to hit the brakes. And so they're almost manipulating your choices to encourage you to hit the brakes for your own benefit, right? So a great example of a policy nudge meant to help society reduce accidents. And technically, we're not taking away your freedom to do what you'd like, but we're making you kind of instinctively do something that's good for everybody. Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about some of my research. I can't see any of you guys anyway, but this would be a great opportunity to just, hide behind the fake picture of yourself. This person clearly did not get into Swarthmore. Okay, so I want to talk about this one paper that I wrote last year with some colleagues. So this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in September 2019. And I did this project with some collaborators at MIT, the Kenyan Ministry of Health, and the World Health Organization. And I'll talk a bit about the motivation behind it, and then what we did. It's essentially kind of the big picture motivation here is trying to use behavioral science to improve outcomes in a really important policy context, which is tuberculosis in the developing world. And so you have to know a little bit about tuberculosis to understand this project. So I'll give you a really bird's eye view. So tuberculosis worldwide is a pretty serious contagious disease. An estimated 2 to 3 billion people are infected. So, I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's like almost half the world's population. Now, most people don't develop the disease, but a lot of people have that bacteria, the tuberculosis bacteria, somewhere within their bodies. So it's a serious illness. It's a respiratory illness, very much like COVID-19. And you can pass it along to people near you through coughing and stuff like that. Now, the treatment success rate, which is the percent of people who successfully get cured once they're treated, varies by country. But there's a couple important things to know about TB. One is, unlike COVID-19, the treatment, we have a treatment for it that completely eradicates the disease, right? So it's fully curable. You can be fully cured of TB. We don't yet know about COVID-19 and its effects, but TB, completely curable. The medicine is available. And in many countries, especially in the developing world, it's free through international aid, right? So if you get TB and you're in sub-Saharan Africa, or you're in a lower income country in East Asia or South Asia, or South America or North America, you are actually able to you know, fully cure yourself, right? And for free, right? So given that, the fact that this map is not all green is a little bit strange, right? We have a free drug to cure you of TB. How come not everyone who gets TB is cured? It's a serious illness that affects your life and can kill you. Surely everyone should take free medicine to save their life, right? So what's going on here? This to us struck us as a behavioral problem as much as a technical problem. And we asked the question, why isn't treatment success 100%? So here's some reasons. One is, unlike some other illnesses, to eradicate TB from your body, you often have to take medicine for not just a few weeks, but a few months, and in some cases up to 9 months. So you can have to take a pill every day at the same time in the day for 9 months. You can imagine people get lax about it. They let it slip, right? Which is actually really problematic, because if you've ever been on antibiotics, the doctor tells you you have to take this for 2 weeks, or you have to take this for 3 weeks or whatever, and they're really serious about it. You can't stop in the middle. It's the same with TB. You can't stop in the middle because you may actually not be fully cured, even if you feel fine. But a lot of people say, I feel good now after a month. I'm going to stop taking these pills. I don't want to take them for another 8 months. But they really must do that to fully cure themselves. This is especially challenging for people to do because TB has these side effects. The pills have these side effects. The medication for TB gives you rash. It can give you a headache and things like that. So, once you feel like I'm not coughing anymore, I don't think I have TB anymore, it's been 3 weeks, I'm just going to stop taking the pills because I don't like this itch that I get. That's a pretty strong motivator for people to stop. This is a picture of Gong Road in Nairobi. I actually lived like just off the screen here when I lived there. And this side of the road, I don't know what's happening on this side of the road, but this is pretty much the norm, right? So like bumper to bumper traffic. So one big challenge for TB in Kenya is it's really hard to get to the doctor in a lot of cases, right? It may be 2 miles down the road, but it takes you an hour to get there. So it's a serious problem, and it can deter people from going to pick up their latest kind of batch of medication every few weeks. And then, of course, there's this concern. I'm not as convinced that it's a serious issue, having met a lot of TB survivors in the developing country context. There's this idea that people might feel stigmatized. Like, if I have TB, I don't want my neighbors to know, and I'm just going to pretend like I don't have it. I don't want to be seen as going to get medication for TB. Maybe it's socially damaging to me. But I'm not super convinced that that's a strong factor here, because I've done some work in Nigeria and Kenya on TB, and it just seems like people are pretty comfortable with the idea of identifying that they have TB to help other people. So, but it could be playing a role here as well. I'll skip over this for the moment. So our basic idea was, can we deliver a behaviorally informed intervention that helps overcome some of those challenges that you saw on the previous slide, right? So why is this behavioral economics? Well, imagine I told you that you have a potentially lethal transmissible disease that will require a long time for you to cure, but it could save your life, and here's free medication. I would think that almost every rational being would take the medication, right? There's almost no reason not to that I can possibly think of. What you saw on the previous slide was almost like, oh, it's a hassle to do this. Well, again, in a cost-benefit calculation by a rational person, they would say, look, it's worth the cost though, because like I don't want to have TB and die of TB, right? So it's not a question of hassle. Like I'd jump through any hoop to potentially save my life and the family and the people around me, right? So this seems like something rational people should do, no questions asked, but the data suggests that they don't. Maybe it's because we're not delivering the right kind of intervention to help them not just kind of cure themselves of TB, but actually adhere to the medication treatment, right, that they've been given. They have the meds in their hands. What's the problem? The problem is now a behavioral problem. So we did this intervention in Nairobi in 2016, and we're doing some follow-ups now. But we enrolled about 1,100 patients in 17 clinics around Nairobi. This is a map of where those clinics are. And essentially anybody who went to one of those clinics and was diagnosed with TB was included in our sample. And people were then randomly assigned to either receive a control intervention or access to what we call the Keheala platform. We built it with a digital health provider that's based in the Nairobi area. And so the idea here was that the control group just got normal care from the hospital. Remember, these are folks who've been diagnosed with TB, right? So they've got their medicine now. They're about to go home. Some people are just told, okay, you're in the control group, so that's it. We'll come in for your checkups and just the normal procedure. The other group was given access to this digital platform. Basically, we got their phone number and we texted them and said, welcome to Keheala. And we had this regular a platform that they interacted with, which I'll describe all the features of the platform in a moment. But that's the basic intervention, right? You either did or didn't get access to this tool that we built to try to address the behavioral challenges of TB medication adherence. So here's the features of that platform. So first is every day you got a text that said, it's time to verify that you took your meds today, basically. And if you didn't respond to this message within a certain number of hours, I think it was 3 hours, you would get a follow-up text message, not from a computer or something, but from an actual person, and not just a person, but someone in Kenya who either had TB and recovered or had a family member who had TB and either recovered or in some cases passed away from the disease. So it's an actual hired staff member that we had on our team who would contact them, and it was a Kenyan. It was not one of us researchers in the West. It was actually somebody from their community who struggled with this disease in some personal way. And we wouldn't monitor their conversation. It would just be a chance for them to say, listen, I mean, you didn't follow up. Like, we're here for you. Are you having some problems? I had problems myself. It was really like trying to personalize the experience a little bit. Once they said they did verify, they said, yes, I did take my meds today. We would send them a motivational text message that focused not on the, like, you're going to get cured because you're doing such a great job, but focused on the collective, right? This is a transmissible disease. And so by taking your medication, you're actually doing something good for society. We wanted people to feel that social benefit, right? That like you're doing something good for the community and the people you care about and the country you care about. Thank you for doing this great thing, right? For all of us, instead of making it all about that person and their own selfish motivation to take the medication. We made sure that the platform worked on not smartphones. So you might say like, well, I mean, do people have phones in Kenya? And I would tell you that phones are almost more ubiquitous in Kenya than here in the US. Like everyone has a phone, including the poorest of the poor. It's just something in the developing world that's taken off. Now, of course, not everyone has an iPhone or an iPhone 12 or whatever. A lot of people have these kind of old school touch button phones. But our platform worked perfectly well on those phones as well. We designed it with local survivors. So we came up with a bunch of these text messages that we would send out, and we talked to local Kenyan survivors of TB, and they laughed at how bad we Western researchers were at. Oops. Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. My dogs were barking at my wife because that's what they do. Right, so we designed this with local survivors. As it turns out, Western scholars are not great at writing text messages for tuberculosis patients in Kenya. I think that was critical for making sure that our platform is effective. So I'll give you some basic results here. So this is just showing you basically a distribution of what percent of the time people actually verified their results. So you can see what you see in this graph here is that there's a lot of people who never responded to our text messages. So maybe 13% of people basically just ignored us and ignored every single text message we sent them. But the majority, the comfortable majority of people verified almost every day. Right? So it does seem like a lot of people engaged. It wasn't the case that 90% of people just deleted every text they got from us. The vast majority were verifying, between 60 and 100% of the time when we texted them. And this is the big thing that we care about the most, which is the rates of unsuccessful outcome by condition, right? So the rates at which people failed to complete treatment successfully. So what does that mean? Here it means that you either died, you came back for your final checkup and you still had TB, which means you didn't take the meds properly, or you disappeared. Now you can imagine if you disappeared and you failed to show up for your final appointment, that's not a good thing. So we consider that an unsuccessful outcome. Doctors and TB experts consider that a bad sign. So essentially, this is anything that's not showing up to your last appointment and being cured. So we look first at the control group, people who didn't have access to the platform. they were about 13% likely to have some problem, right? They either failed or they passed away or disappeared. In the intervention condition, that rate of unsuccessful outcome was down to 4%. So a huge difference in people's likelihood of failing treatment. And if you are a stats person, that p-value is way, way below any traditional threshold of statistical significance. So there's a lot of zeros before there's anything other than a zero. So I'll skip over this as well. So big picture here, our main takeaway here is that you can build tools that treat people as people instead of treating them as sort of robotic optimizers. You treat them as just individuals with flaws, with systematic biases that prevent them from doing the right thing, even when they know what the right thing is. If you build the right tools, you can really, really help improve outcomes massively and improve society significantly, right? So just to build on this, I've been doing a lot of work lately on sort of COVID and masking, because it falls in the same kind of category, right? Like, how do we encourage people to wear masks in a time of COVID? It's an issue here on campus. It's an issue around society as a whole. And it's another classic case of we need people to think about the social good, the collective. Same thing with climate change, right? There's a series of behavior change problems that are coming up and that you guys as young people are all going to have to deal with, unfortunately, in the future, which require people to think about the collective before they think about themselves, or subserve their own interests in the interest of the collective. Buy energy efficient appliances, right? Think about not flying all the time. Think about taking vacations closer to home, or not driving around so much, right? Things like that. So how do we encourage people to do those kind of things? Well, there's some tools that we tested out here that seem to be effective, right? Focus on the collective good, focus on the benefits that other people can get, and make sure that you follow up. You remind people consistently about the behaviors that are best for society. So I'll skip over some more of these graphs here and just kind of wrap up, because I would love to hear from you guys a little bit more. Which is just to summarize here, behavioral economics is about these systematic deviations from rational decision making. And recognizing those deviations can help us build policies that are tailored to human beings as they are, right? So rigorous testing of these insights is critical, though, right? We want to make sure that we're testing and using insights that are effective at scale. And here at Swarthmore, I work with lots of students on lots of different projects that are sort of in this domain, right? Testing out behavioral insights in real world policy settings. So I do a lot of work with the mayor's policy office. We have students from Swarthmore go intern with the mayor's office every summer, except for this past one, unfortunately, because of COVID. Same thing, we have partners out in Kenya who take on a few Swarthmore students every summer. So we have these sort of dedicated Swarthmore only internships based out in Kenya, working with behavioral economics and behavioral science organizations that are implementing a lot of these kind of controlled trials out in the field. So it's something I try to do, and other faculty here at Swarthmore try to do, is really involve undergraduate students in the research process. I've only been here for 5 years. I think I have probably 4 or 5, maybe more, student collaborators that we've written published papers together. And that's not abnormal. It's abnormal almost anywhere else, but it's pretty common here. So that's certainly something that you could potentially look forward to if you were coming here. It's a great place to kind of kick off your research career if that was of interest to you. But let me stop talking here. I'll just put up my info so you can email me or follow me on Twitter or whatever, and find my website. But I want to hear from you guys, and obviously I also want to see you guys. So I'll turn it over to Christina to kind of kick us off for the Q&A. And thanks for your attention, everybody. And sorry again about having to be off, have your cameras and your mics off, but feel free to unmute when Christina says it's okay, and take off your videos as well.